This is a quilt I made 14 years ago, but recently a friend gave me her orphan blocks, and I am now going to put them together as well. This is something that I love doing. I pick out scraps, things from my cupboard that I could use with it for sashings, for backings, for bindings, and I audition a whole bunch of small pieces and see what I can do. Then I lay out the blocks so I can tell where I am going to put them. There really isn't a pattern for making the quilt itself. You just put them together any way you want to and make it work. And I've decided I'm going to make this into a 40-inch by 60-inch quilt and donate it to one of the local charities, either something for a child or something for a senior. Okay, I'm starting to sew these together, and as you can see, I have rearranged them slightly. They might still change, I'm not quite sure. But the bottom row now, those blocks are actually bigger in size than the ones that I had at the bottom before. So if I'm going to make myself this, if I'm going to make this quilt into the size of a baby quilt or a lap quilt for someone, it is going to be 40 inches wide by 60 inches long. And those three that I have at the top now, the farthest away, make 38 inches with the little strips in between the blocks. And this one, as you can see, I already sewed 4 of the other blocks together, which were a different size than those. So I made a little sashing in between, and I am just going to sew the bottom row together without any more sashing, just to have it the same length as the top row up there with some sashing. I know it might look a little bit off-putting, but I think it's better to have a nice size than try to make it bigger and try to make it bigger and try to make it bigger. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to sew this one to these, to this, and no sashing in between. As you can see, I also applique on a butterfly. I have a whole bunch of fabrics that have butterflies on them, and I thought maybe I could use some of those, fussy cut them a bit, and applique them on. The 4 that I have in the center right now, they were also different sizes than the ones that are at the bottom and the ones that are at the top. So with 2 of them, I just added a border around them to make them the same size as the 2 other ones. I sewed them together, and then I am going to put the smallest blocks around in a fashion like that. I might change the colors, white, orange, to make them the same on both sides, but pretty much it's going to be looking something like that. So this is the way I think I'm going to put it together. It's going to be a pretty little quilt with all that pink in it and the flowers. And I just have to, I'm going to make rows. This center block, that row there will be 1 row. I will add these 2 to this, to these 2, and as I add them together, I will position the spacers to make it the same as the sides. It's a little bit of arithmetic to get it to come out to the correct size all the way around, but I don't want to add more than I need to. And then I'll just put a border around the whole thing to make it all unified. The border might be different than the pink that I'm using because I don't have a lot of that pink. I might have to use something else to go around as a border, but that's fine. That's the whole fun of putting together something that you weren't planning to do in the first place. Today is the winter solstice. It is the shortest amount of daylight in the year, and today is really frosty cold outside, but the sun is warm and shining through the window and illuminating the space right where my sewing machine is. It's so warm and comforting to sew all of these flowers with the sun shining in the middle of a cold spell outside. I just love it. And sometimes as I'm sewing on my sewing machine and quilting lines here and there, I dream of gardening and I think about the flowers that I have in my garden. And sometimes, I've been doing some songwriting, and sometimes I come up with little tunes in my head that I think would be a wonderful thing to do. So that's what I'm going to be doing here, thinking about summer times, thinking about the warmth of the sun and the flowers growing, and the sun shining through my window pane. I think that's just wonderful.
On a frosty winter morning, as the snow lies all around, the sunlight streams through windows, touching everything it's found. Through the day she's sewing, stitching dreams with every thread, a quilt of blooms and colors for the springtime that lies ahead. Oh, the flowers will grow in the warmth of the sun, when the winter has faded and the thaw has begun. Every stitch holds a promise, every seam tells a tale of a world that will blossom beyond the snowy veil. Her hands work in silence, but her heart begins to sing of the daisies and the tulips and the hope that they will bring. Though the ground outside is frozen beneath the snowy hue, she dreams of fields of color kissed by skies of deepest blue. Oh, the flowers will grow in the warmth of the sun, when the winter has faded and the thaw has begun. Every stitch holds a promise, every seam tells a tale of a world that will blossom beyond the snowy veil. The frost will melt, the streams will flow, the earth will come alive. The garden in her mind will bloom and every seed will thrive. Her quilt becomes a meadow, her threads a budding vine. She's sewing into winter the sweet breath of springtime. Oh, the flowers will grow in the warmth of the sun, when the winter has faded and the thaw has begun. Every stitch holds a promise, every dream tells a tale of a world that will blossom beyond the snowy veil. As she sews by the window, while the winter winds still play, she's stitching every moment towards a brighter warmer day.
Well, I did have some fun making that song. I hope you enjoyed it. Every once in a while, I could add a little song that I have written and performed. And I've been making quite a few songs about quilting and sewing. So some of them are quite interesting. People find them interesting anyway. Now it's time to finish my quilt. I'm just trimming off the extra batting and backing. I use my long ruler to get a good straight cut. The borders along the quilt squares have been added evenly all the way around, so it's easy for a small quilt like this to just trim away the excess. Do the long sides first, and then I do the top and the bottom. These small quilts are very easy to make. They're fun to make, and they go to a good cause. So after I finish trimming them, I always take the trimmed quilt, fold it in half, and fold it in half again to make sure that the width and the length on both sides are even. The next thing is to select the binding. I cut my binding strips 2 1/2 inches, sew them together, make them long enough to go around the perimeter of the quilt. Before I sew it onto the quilt, I always press it first. I press the seams open in joining the bindings, and then I also press them in half lengthwise, and the bindings get sewn on folded in half. I sew it on the back side first, and then I fold it over to the front side and finish sewing the extra pieces on the front. That way the front looks nice. The back might have a little bit of a curve on it, but the front looks good. That's what I want to have happen. So sewing on the binding, mitering the corners, I've explained this in previous videos. It's always good to make sure that your corners are nice and tidy, the bindings are secure and accurate. So that's really the end of this quilt. I'm going to finish this binding and I'll show you the finished quilt. So once again, if you find this video entertaining or educational, please give me a thumbs up. I am always happy to answer questions if you have some questions about any of the things that I've said. And if you have not subscribed, please consider adding a subscription to this channel. It helps me to decide whether I should continue or not. I love making these videos. They're a lot of fun. And I hope you enjoy watching them. So, see you next time. In the meantime, take care and have a good time with your quilts.